Hello, my name's Thomas, and today on my podcast, British Culture, Albion Never Dies, I'm very, very, very lucky to have Joe Darlington, who you might know better as Mr. Being James Bond. He is a very, very successful, prolific, and wonderful podcaster, and also the author of the book, Being James Bond. You can find a link to that book in the show notes. I'm very, very lucky to have him on today. We spent some time arranging this. Both had some very busy months, but I'm very, very glad to be able to bring this to you. We do talk about the latest James Bond film, so if you haven't seen it, well, I advise you see it and then listen to this podcast. We do talk about the latest film, but we don't dwell on it too much. It's pretty broad-ranging discussion, and I really hope that you enjoy it as much as I enjoyed. Okay, Joe Darlington, Being James Bond, thank you very, very much for joining me.
Thomas, thank you for inviting me. And let me just tell you, I apologize because you and I have been talking for literally months at this point. And my schedule, just because it was just honestly like just everything was sort of happening, at once. And so we've been trying very hard to try to get together for quite a while. So thank you for being patient with me.
Oh, not at all, not at all. It's a pleasure to have you. And again, thank you very much for making time to chat to me. You've been doing James Bond podcasting for a little while.
Quite a while. Yep.
How long has it been now?
I literally just hit 15 years in November. And quite frankly, because I was so busy, I really wasn't able to do much about it. In fact, I remember the weeks beforehand, I was going to try to, put together some kind of a video or just a little, something to signify the day. And I remember literally the morning of, I said, wow, I didn't do anything. And I made a very, very quiet little Instagram post just saying, by the way, literally 15 years ago on this day, I did my very first podcast, and I got a nice little outpouring of people said very nice things about it. So yeah, 15 years ago, it was literally just a few weeks before the release of Casino Royale, which goes to show you how long we've sort of been on the Daniel Craig road.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was literally just a few weeks before Casino, and I obviously had been thinking about it long before that. So it really was kind of born of the Brosnan era, I suppose you could say. And just kind of dumb luck, it was just literally probably 2 weeks before, I think, the release of Casino. So,
it was
quite a while.
Prompted by the new film. It was a coincidence that it was the new film. It prompted you. What?
I think it really was just sort of a coincidence, because honestly, I mean, I remember, I've been a Bond fan since I was a kid. But it was probably in the Brosnan era where I really started to kind of get a little more hardcore. The internet all of a sudden became a thing, and I was on all the fan sites. And every time a new Bond film came out, opening night, I'm there. I remember. In fact, even if you look at my logo, it's literally the silhouette of Brosnan. And not for any particular reason. I just thought it was a great shot and really kind of, personified Bond very well. But yeah, no, it was very much in the Brosnan years that I really started to get a little more serious and kind of just wanted to be part of the bigger conversation. And, podcasting was kind of still in its infancy. And in fact, I think most people probably didn't even know what a podcast was at that point. I had some friends who kind of got into the game a little early. So I said, why not? Let's try this whole podcast thing and see what happens.
Yeah. Did you get much of a response when you first put out episodes? Did people get in contact with you right away? What was it?
It took and it is funny because honestly, when I talk to people today who start podcasts, just content creation in general, the thing I always tell people, my only words of advice is patience, because it will feel weird in the beginning. When I first did a podcast, I always say it felt like just writing a note and putting it in a bottle and throwing it into the ocean. You have no idea if anybody's ever going to hear this, literally. So, you see, like you said, you just give it your best. Little by little, I started to get some emails and responses. Hey, I've been listening to your podcast. I think I remember I got, first few emails were a lot of fun. I remember the first one that I really got excited for was somebody who said to me, I was walking across campus and I bumped into a friend and we were both listening to our iPods. And we both realized we were both listening to your podcast. We were both listening to Being James Bond, and I was like, "Oh, that was really cool."
That's cool.
So it's very weird to start off, and I kind of feel like it was just kind of one of those great things where I got in at the right time. So once it kind of exploded, once the whole internet exploded, and even YouTube and all those kind of things started to really take off, and all of a sudden everybody is creating content. I kind of had that, I got in early enough, so I was already kind of the, I get called the old timer of Bond sometimes. So it's fun, it's funny. I always joke. I say, I might not have the best podcast, but I certainly have the oldest one. So I as long as I don't give it up, I'll always have that mantle.
I mean, you've had time to review every single Bond film, apart from the latest, at least 3 times, right?
I think I have actually. Yeah, now that you mention it, because I know. I mean, again, it's funny when because Casino just kind of dumb luck. Casino came out about 2 weeks after my first podcast. So naturally, I that wasn't even really my plan, was to start doing reviews. I kind of thought like, well, that's not really my forte, but I was like, but I can't not, do a full blown discussion of the film. I said, like I said, we were really kind of pioneering back then. Didn't really know like do I have to stick to a format? Do I again, I'm just kind of winging it. So, but obviously the film comes out, you have to talk about it. So. Right. So we did and it was Scott and I did the very first review, and basically we decided after the Blu-ray came out, we decided to review the Blu-ray. So we did it again. And then we did reviews of all of the films. We actually did early reviews of all the films in probably the first year, because there was like a new DVD set that had come out, like the second big go around of DVDs. And so we did kind of short reviews of all of them. But yeah, I mean, I guess since then we went back and redid all of them. So the new films, I think, had to have been at least 3 full blown reviews. And I would say prior to the earlier films, the first 20, at least twice, there's at least 2 versions floating around. Sure.
Absolutely. And you do have your favorites. We all do.
Oh yeah.
Am I right in thinking Octopussy is a favorite of yours?
It is absolutely in my top. My list, my literal. I literally do keep a list. And the once you get down to positions 3, 4, and 5, they tend to move around a little bit. But Octopussy is always in my top 5, if not in my top 3. That one always has a special place for me, and I sort of always it was the first one I saw in the theater, and I even beyond the nostalgia part, I've always considered that one to be a very underrated Bond film. I can understand why it doesn't really I think it's reasonably respected. A lot of people don't like it. But so I can understand why some people wouldn't necessarily go for this one. For me personally, I feel like it's such a good Cold War, genuine spy thriller. There's so many. I mean, there are obviously a lot of silly moments in it. Some that are genuinely silly, and some that I think people just kind of misread. When people get hung up on the clown makeup, I always kind of feel like, oh, you're missing the point of that scene. But again, of course, everyone's opinions are different, and but yeah, no, I think it's a classic. I really do. I think it's kind of doesn't get the respect it deserves, but I think it's easily one of Roger Moore's best, if not his best.
I must admit, I listened to your review of it and made me think more and more about it. I actually cycled back and watched the film. I honestly enjoyed it more. You were pointing out things about it and acknowledging, as I say, certain points about it, but it rarely gave me more insight into that film. So I appreciate
Mission accomplished. Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, and that's the best you can hope for, is just try to get people to kind of, respond to it and rethink it a little bit, revisit. So that's music to my ears. Thank you.
And something that you often talk about is that you take things from the films and you see, can you do this in real life, right? So you play backgammon, for example, from the film, or horse riding. What's been your favorite Bond experience?
That has been, honestly, that was what you're talking about now. I mean, that was literally probably the thing that really pushed me into the idea of doing a podcast, because, it was just sort of always fascinating to me that James Bond, albeit a fictional character, he just has the ability to do pretty much anything. Like I can't think of a single time where James Bond just couldn't do something. Anything you put in front of him, he can do. In fact, I'll probably even say, I think Tomorrow Never Dies, when he went to type on the keyboard and it had the Asian characters on it, I think that was the first time I ever saw James Bond in a movie. Whoops, I can't do something.
Yeah.
So I thought that was kind of fascinating. But yeah, I mean, basically just anything he can do, and any sport, any activity, any leisure activity. If he lands any place in the world, he knows a good restaurant nearby. And that was the thing that really kind of caught my attention. And I said, that's something we could kind of start to explore and look at and say, all right, and start to ask, like, is that reasonable? Is it reasonable that one human being can know all of these things? So I kind of feel like that was sort of that was the goal all of a sudden, was to literally learn everything, as impossible as that may be. But so yeah, that kind of grabbed my attention early on. And what's my favorite? But I kind of feel like, if I had to pick a single activity that was something that kind of rang out with me, I'll say the bungee jumping was probably the best.
Wow.
Going to the actual location from GoldenEye and doing the bungee jump. I feel like that's probably the one that it's so hard to top that one. I mean, that to me was just an incredible experience. But I think if I had to answer it differently, I think it's the travel. The traveling itself is probably the thing that really kind of just moves me. I feel like that I would say to any young person growing up, like, if I had any advice, travel. Just do some traveling. Do what you can. And you don't have to. I mean, it would be great if we could do it like James Bond, where it's the top of the nicest hotels and the most magnificent meals, etc. But if you can't, just make it happen. Just get yourself there, because to see these places in real life, and honestly, it's such a great lens. Like, the James Bond films, I are sort of just it's like looking at something through a lens, and without that, like there are so many places I probably would never have even thought to go had James Bond not been there first. So it really has been just a gift in a way, like just this sort of magnificent gift that we because we've been introduced to it through James Bond, and we've kind of taken it upon ourselves to go and visit some of these places. I mean, that's been second to none. And I think the most incredible experience I had recently, and I can't believe it's already over 2 years ago that this happened, but the On Her Majesty Secret Service trip that I did, it was Portugal and Switzerland. I mean, you just could not. I mean, honestly, I've done so many podcasts where I was talking about this, and I feel like every time, like, I'm always struggling to find words, Like there's only so many superlative words I can use to talk about this experience. I mean, it was absolutely amazing. We're going to these Bond locations with the biggest Bond fans in the world, and some of the actors, including George Lazenby, is there the entire time. I mean, and again, this is my favorite Bond film for many, many years. I think it was not until Casino came out that it actually started to rival for the top spot. But honestly, I mean, like I can't even think of anything. I mean, it was a religious experience practically. I mean, again, this is a film that's been, one of my all-time favorites for years, and to sort of, start to walk in Bond's footsteps and go to some of the same places and now celebrating with some of the people from. I mean, it was really just off the charts.
Yeah, it's interesting. He is a great traveler, and he doesn't just go to random places or just beautiful places. They're often places of great significance in the real world, right? So as you say, Bond can become a lens through which you can discover so many interesting things.
Absolutely. I mean, like I said, I mean, I think there's a reason why, Bond kind of takes this, I mean, I got into James Bond when I was young. Really, I think when I was young, it was really just because it was an action movie. I mean, I was watching Indiana Jones movies and Star Wars when I was younger, and as you start to get older, you start to outgrow some of them. We still love them. We still have a great fondness for them. But the James Bond ones all of a sudden kind of took on a sort of different significance, where you started to say to yourself, like, boy, the older I get, the more I want to do Bond stuff. The more, I suddenly want to, try a little golf or do a little gambling, have a cocktail, have a nice meal at a nice restaurant. Like all of a sudden, like the Bond lifestyle all of a sudden started to feel like something you wanted for yourself. And no other franchise has that. I mean, like I said, I mean, I love Star Wars as much as anyone else, and I'm watching all the new shows lately and kind of just loving them to death. But it's not something I want in my everyday life, But James Bond, I kind of do.
Yeah, you've talked about this lifestyle aspect. I've heard this before, and it is an interesting aspect of Bond. I mean, it does make it stand out a bit differently from, say, the Schwarzenegger films or the Rocky films or whatever. It is a bit of a world. You saw that a bit more in the most recent film than some of the other Daniel Craig films. Do you feel that way, or what's your take on that?
I mean, I think that's kind of the core of it. It's something as I think no matter how old we get, and maybe even as you get older, specifically, you start to want to emulate a lot of what Bond is and what he does. And again, we all sort of come at it from a different angle. I mean, I've heard people talk about like a lot of the guys get very into the clothing. I'm probably not as much, not as much as a lot of guys do. I kind of I'm very comfortable in comfortable clothes and stuff. But give me a good meal and a good cocktail and a good excuse to travel, and I'll take it every day. So yeah, I mean, I guess that's a big part of it. I mean, honestly, it's like I've heard people use the term cosplay, or is this cosplay when you get a little too into James Bond and trying to do some of these things? But it's like I said, it's if I was I keep sort of like comparing it to other film franchises. I couldn't get away with dressing up as something from Star Wars or from Star Trek or any of those. You'd be spotted from a mile away, and it's like, what is this guy doing? But when you start to do it like Bond, it's like it's almost like your own little secret. Like if I'm wearing a Bond sweater, unless I'm hanging around with one of my Bond guys who kind of can spot that from a mile away, other people just they don't know, they have no idea. They just as far as they know, you just dress nice,
Yeah. So. Yeah, it's a secret Bond moment.
Yeah, it is.
And of course, you're on the eastern seaboard, right? So Bond does go to New York. Have you explored those locations?
It's funny, not nearly as much as you would think. I mean, it's funny. The last few times Luckily, again, because of where I am, I do have some, a good crew of people who live, in the general area. So a few times we've met up in New York, and because of that, there's a couple spots that we tend to gravitate towards. We'll take a picture in front of this building. It was in Live and Let Die, etc. But I really, ironically, haven't done as much New York exploring as you would think. In fact, I mean, when I first started doing Being James Bond, I mean, I was always kind of looking for places to talk about, places that I had been to. And I remember kind of realizing one day, like, why haven't I done New York? I mean, and not for nothing. I literally, I'm pretty sure. I mean, I've been to New Orleans, I've been to Jamaica. I'm pretty sure I've done most of the Live and Let Die locations that people can do. Yet for some reason, I haven't done New York. So it would, again, just kind of, I guess it's like anything else. Like if it's in your own backyard, it doesn't feel exotic, so you don't really think to do it. But so yeah, maybe I'll have to fix that. And but I mean, I have done probably most of the New York spots that you could do, but I just really haven't really done podcasts about it or anything. I mean, I've been to the Oyster House at Grand Central Station, which was from one of the novels. 21 Club before it shut down, which kind of broke my heart. So I definitely have covered a lot of ground. But yeah, again, it's one of those. I guess I just kind of took it for granted. So.
That's interesting because right in the early days of the novels, Fleming wrote one book, Moonraker, set around the UK, and a lot of his UK audience hated it. So after that, he always went further afield. So often it encourages us to go further, right?
Yeah, yeah, and it is funny too when you read a lot of the Fleming materials. I mean, Fleming actually wrote a lot about not only about New York City. Well, it's funny when you read Thrilling Cities. Fleming does not hide his disdain for New York. It's like he's got no love for New York at all. And he actually wrote a lot of. There's some areas up by me that up in upstate New York, which I guess back in the '60s were sort of. It was pretty posh back in those days, and of course now it's like just dreadfully boring. Like the idea of going up to upstate New York is just so like why would anybody do that? Yet they're in all the novels. So again, different times as well.
Absolutely. I mean, he's written some things. For example, I was living outside Hong Kong, and I followed Thrilling Cities to some of those locations, which are very much cleaner and nicer than they were when he visited. But he doesn't give half views, does he? He gives a very strong, accurate opinion of everyone.
You do not have to really try to figure out what he feels about something. He'll tell you very quickly. Absolutely.
I'm interested often in, obviously James Bond is your main interest, I assume. I don't know your life. But I'm wondering, outside of James Bond, kind of what interest does it connect to? Does it connect to other things?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, honestly, a lot of the Bond thing. I mean, I guess these days, honestly, my whole world has kind of just been. It's funny. We had a whole year in pajamas, pretty much. Like I mean, I feel like I spent all of 2020 in pajama pants. In fact, I remember when I was doing laundry. I said to my girlfriend, I said, this is really bad. I'm washing one pair of jeans and 5 pairs of pajama pants. I mean, this is crazy. And then all of a sudden, like kind of like a slingshot, the next year it was just back to normal, like back to work. And I was all of a sudden I was just insanely busy to sort of compensate for the year before. But I mean, before that, I used to do a lot of skiing. I definitely played golf. I liked to play poker. I mean, there was a lot of things that I picked up, and probably, very much because of James Bond. That there's a lot of things that really did get my attention and were sort of on my radar that I might not have thought about otherwise. But beyond the Bond stuff, I'm definitely a big fan of just film in general. I do love movies. For a little while, I actually did a second podcast before things just got a little too crazy. But I was doing a second podcast called Reviews Without Remorse, where I was doing film reviews with a friend for a while, which I enjoyed very much. And Yeah, and other than that, I think I mean, these days I'm kind of settling down. So, my off hours, my non-bond time is usually just some family functions, and I'm very involved in the my local community and a lot of activities and functions. That's it. Other than that, I'm just kind of a working stiff. Like just keeping very busy with work. Again, I was very spoiled in 2020 as much as I shouldn't make jokes about it. I mean, it was pretty rough, very extremely rough time for a lot of people. But for me, it certainly gave me a lot of time to do videos and more podcasts and that kind of thing. So I mean, I definitely had the time to kind of have fun with James Bond, and of course the new film was coming up, so there was a lot of build up and talk about that. So, but so now I'm kind of back to work and back to life has gotten very serious all of a sudden.
Back to reality, yes. But you're right.
Yeah.
We have the new movie, and opinions have ranged wildly. You enjoyed it.
Yes, I did. In fact, it was funny. I remember I remember when one of the things that this film really made me aware of was just how much of an experience the trailer is. Like, as soon as you get that first trailer, I feel like that's I would almost say that 50% of your overall experience with the film kind of happens in that trailer. Like, you already get a big sense of what you're in for. And then, of course, you're still, I mean, it kind of seems silly to say, because, I mean, the trailer is 2 minutes and the film is 2.5, almost 3 hours. But yeah, I remember being just very aware this time that I felt like once I saw the first trailer, I was already on board with the idea. It was like I knew I was going to like it. And then of course, when I did see it, I just really, really liked it. I mean, I felt like there was never any real possibility, at least not that I could imagine. There was never a real possibility it would ever exceed or match Casino Royale. Casino Royale was, I kind of felt like just the planets just aligned perfectly for that one. I mean, not only was it the one Fleming novel that they were never able to do before, but they were actually able to do that story in a modern way. So I kind of felt like and it just worked. Everything about it just worked. So I felt like, we're probably never, my expectations were sort of tempered. And plus, because we've been on this road with Daniel Craig, we saw where Spectre led off. So we kind of knew, okay, this is going to be a radically different Bond film. There's no way that, I mean, there's no way in the world that James Bond is going to walk into M's office, get a folder, go off on a mission. I mean, we know that there's no way we're not going to have it's not going to be traditional in any way. So it was really just a we were just waiting to see, okay, can they sort of put this all together in a way that is satisfying? And I remember walking into that film, and I purposely avoided any kind of reviews. Any of my friends who were fortunate enough to fly over to the UK 2 weeks before I had seen the film, I said, I don't want to know anything. I don't want to know anything. And a little, there was a little spoiling that happened before I actually saw it. But I was still kind of, even though I knew some major plot points, it was still okay. But how is it going to happen? How is it going to happen? How are they going to leave it? Are they going to close doors? Are they going to leave them open just a little bit, possibly? I walked out of the film the first time, my first viewing. I walked out and I was just blown away. I thought this was magnificent. I said this was a magnificent film. Everything about it was, and even if I was still sort of back and forth, in my own thoughts about like, well, what was that a good idea? It was, even if I wasn't really sure if I was pleased with the choices, I remember feeling like, but the film was capable, like it was a smart film, like there, at no point, like some films, Bond or otherwise, some films are let's say if you don't like a film, it could be because the filmmakers did exactly what they wanted to do, but I just didn't care for what they were looking to do.
Yeah.
Other films fail because, I might like what they're trying to do, but they're just dropping the ball. They just can't do what they're trying to do. I walked out of this film feeling like they did exactly what they wanted. And I thought there was no point did it feel like I was not in capable hands. I mean, the film is gorgeous looking, I mean, every shot was a gorgeous looking shot. So I just felt like I felt like everything I'm watching, there was sort of a conscious thought behind it. So at no point did I ever feel like, that didn't really work out so well. But I did, again, I'm not saying it's a perfect film, not by any stretch. I think there are choices that were made. Okay, I can see the argument that they could have gone a different way, but just as a whole, I loved it.
Yeah. Okay. Very positive.
And I guess we're kind of in this. Are we in the same camp more or less?
We are in the same camp. I mean, I did shut myself off from all reviews, all social media when it came out in the UK until I saw it. And I was on a high. I didn't switch on my social media until a few days later just because I was still riding that. And then when I saw the reviews, I was astonished to see what a variety of opinions was out there. Because for me, it was, I have to say, like a checklist of everything I wanted. I was very, very surprised.
Yeah, it's funny, right? And I had a similar experience as well, because I remember feeling like I walked out thinking this was a spectacular film, and I didn't think anybody was going to disagree, and I was sort of shocked how much a lot of people were like, no, not so much. I was like, really? So yeah, I guess that was pretty that I'll just say it. I mean, it surprised me that a lot of people weren't crazy about it, and I thought, wow, all right, so I guess call me crazy. Yeah, I again, like I said, I feel like we can and certainly will talk about whether or not it was a good idea to do some of the things that they did. Does that make for a satisfying experience? I mean, I put it this way: when I saw Daniel Craig getting off the boat with a couple fish in one hand and the harpoon gun in the other hand, I was sold. I was I said, that's it. This film has won me over. I thought, I mean, you could not get more Fleming than that. I was almost, it was, I almost felt like in some ways, I mean, kind of similar to, I mentioned Star Wars before, and I'm watching some of the newer shows. And it's funny because, the Star Wars, the sequels with Rey and Finn, and I mean, to me, they're just awful, like just awful. And, and then I'm watching some of the newer things, The Mandalorian, the Boba Fett show, not quite as good as Mandalorian, but still in that ballpark. I'm watching this and I'm saying to myself, wow, why was this so hard? Like these shows make it look really easy. Like this, like all along, this is all you had to do, guys. So I don't know why they went so off the reservation into these other weird territories when it just, I mean, like I said, these shows make it look easy. I feel like when I saw that moment where Craig was just strolling down the deck, with the fish and the harpoon gun, I kind of had a similar vibe. Like, wow, like that, like again, made it look easy. Like it's like you tore a page out of Fleming, and slapped it up on the screen with this gorgeous color, gorgeous scenery. I mean, I came home and I was joking with my girlfriend. I said, "You realize we're gonna have to redo the entire house now?" Because I saw James Bond's apartment in Jamaica. Now we have to redo the whole house and make it look exactly like that. I mean, honestly, I like I said, I felt like it was a page torn out of Fleming, and just I said you can't get better. And again, I mean, there were certainly things, it's funny. I mean, it is a film that, by its own design, probably certain things you couldn't do with it. Like I said, if you're going to pick up at the end of, you know, where Spectre leaves off, obviously it paints you into certain corners. So there was things they couldn't necessarily do. Yet there was also things that, because of what it is, I mean, one of my favorite things in a Bond film is seeing Bond in moments of leisure where he's like, it's downtime, and it is so rare. Like you get films like Tomorrow Never Dies, Quantum of Solace. Like it just starts out where Bond is on a mission, and it just doesn't let up until the last second when he, you know, saves the world, foils the crime. And you don't really get a lot of breathing room. Like I like those moments in Dr. No when it opens up and he's just in a casino just because he's enjoying himself, you know. For Your Eyes Only has some great moments where he had a few minutes and they're walking around Greece and you're taking in the local color, and it's like, boy, like, and I there are times when I say to myself, these are my favorite parts of Bond movies. So why is it so rare that we actually get that? So when this film opens up and I had downtime with Bond and his girl before, you know, all hell broke loose. Then you had more downtime where Bond was solo. He was all by himself and he kind of found his own groove, you know, just living by himself. I was like, wow, this movie's giving me like overdoses of Bond just having downtime. So, and like I said, I mean, it was gorgeous sceneries. I mean, I was just over the moon with this film. So, like I said, the fact that I guess I can't really, to kind of address the elephant in the room, the ending I think put a lot of people off. And I remember, I mean, I even did podcasts. I did videos probably a year prior when the rumors came out. And like there were leaks, and I remember the Daily Mail was running headlines about what was going to happen. And I remember doing a reaction to that. And of course, back then I was like, oh, I hope they don't do that. Oh, I hope they don't do this. I mean, I was really kind of nervous. But then once it actually played out and I watched it unfold, for some reason, it just kind of worked. And I was just sold. So, you know, like I said, I can certainly understand why people would have a problem with it, but for some reason, it just didn't bother me.
No, I mean, a friend of mine who's not a fan has just seen the latest one. She hasn't seen most of the others, but she saw it and said, you know, the best thing was, you know, the heroic actions at the end was, and how moving it was. And you mentioned earlier two of your favorite ones, are Casino Royale and On Her Majesty's Secret Service, which are more emotional. They're more moving than most of them. They go deeper.
Yes, absolutely. And I yes, I completely concur that my favorites often do. I mean, On Her Majesty's Secret Service, you know, and even ones like The Living Daylights comes to mind. I find that I really do respond when there's a romance that feels believable. You know, if Bond is being pulled in, then chances are me as the viewer, I'm also going to be pulled in. So yeah, I absolutely. And seriously, when I saw, and I was not a fan of Spectre at all, no. You know, I just really didn't, that one, just nothing about that was really connecting for me. And honestly, this was supposed to be the big romance where he's meeting Madeline and they're supposed to be falling in love, and it never worked. And yet somehow this film opened up, and I just the opening shots of them driving in the car, for some reason I'm already sold. And I kind of feel, I guess it's because like a film has a certain advantage where when the film opens up, I guess it's sort of, what's the word I'm looking for? Like, I'm probably not using this word correctly, but it's almost as if when the film opens up and you see two people in love, you're already accepting the premise,
Mm.
like you have no reason to say no they don't, because the film is opening up and I can see that they're together, whereas like Spectre was trying to walk me down step by step, so it was kind of just not really working. Yet for some reason when this film opened up, I almost just took it for granted. I'm like, okay, I'm sort of on board with this. So I guess it's just better direction. I kind of felt, and it was interesting because, the actress who plays Madeline, I've seen her in other things, and I've always thought, she has a very interesting presence. She was in one of the Mission Impossible films, and I thought she was great in there. And then I remember just feeling like she seemed so wasted in Spectre. I felt like this film sort of knew how to work with her much better, and I felt like she came off much better in this one. So I found that just much more. I found myself much more able to believe it.
Yeah, I mean, this film grew the role of so many of the different characters. We saw more of M, we saw more of Q, we saw more of most of our regular cast. And I'm wondering if you'd like that for, say, going forward, or whether you prefer it kind of more the old way where M is there for a minute and Bond goes on his mission.
Right.
Would you like to see a mission-orientated Bond in the future?
I think it would really depend. I mean, it's interesting because just looking forward down the road, and interesting. By the way, I think one of the reasons why I never had a problem with the ending is because I knew that this was, no matter what, this was going to be the last Daniel Craig Bond film. And I remember, when they did the big death scene, and like I said, I mentioned earlier that before I had seen the film, it got spoiled. Like I already saw people, so they're killing Bond at the end of this, and I was like, oh come on, I don't want to know that. Even though I had heard it, I kind of already forgot it, or just wasn't sure if it was true, etc. And so when I walked into the film, I kind of was feeling like that was probably going to happen. I mean, like I said, I was assuming that what I heard was correct. There's always a chance that it's not, but even as I knew it was approaching, I was wondering if they were going to do that kind of gimmick where, it happens off camera and then like he shows up later and, kind of like the Dark Knight Rises, or, where it's like, oh, there he is. Oh, he's really not dead. I remember thinking like that could very well be how that happens. But then I remember thinking like, but if they did that, it's just another technique, it's another gimmick you could use. It's a tool, it's a storytelling tool if you choose to go that way. But I kind of felt like they would have been, it would have felt like they were punking out at that point. Like, I mean, why? Yeah. Just if you're gonna do it, just do it. So like, why play around with that silly trope? So I think that's another reason why I was just okay with it. Like I knew this was the last Craig. I saw the beginning of Bond's tenure, and now I'm seeing the literal ending. So it kind of fits. And again, we're living in the whole Daniel Craig era has been this. I almost want to say it's like an alternate universe story. I mean, again, we already got on board with the idea. That this was a different James Bond. It was not the Bond that we had seen up until now. I mean, I've always sort of said that even the Brosnan films kind of felt like an unofficial reboot, even though they never actually said it. I mean, at this point, I mean, the series had gone on so long. All of the original actors are gone, and the only one left at that point was Desmond Llewellyn. And there seemed to be a lot of things in the Brosnan years where they were kind of creating their own continuity. You had Paris Carver, who was supposedly an old flame, but we've never seen her. But the Craigs, I mean, they specifically said, look, we're starting over. So I said, all right, so this is simply an alternate timeline. James Bond, everything that we're doing with him is a different experiment than what happened before. So again, I feel like that's kind of, maybe that's why the ending just sat fine with me. I realized, by the way, you asked me a completely different question, and I just went off on a total different tangent.
I like the direction.
But in terms of the in terms of whether or not we see the crew in future, again, whatever they do going forward, it's gonna have to be a complete reboot. So it'll be interesting to see how we kick it off, where we go from this. Do I want to see? It's interesting because I feel like what was funny about the Craig tenure is that it all felt like, Casino Royale felt like sort of an origin story, and then we thought at the end of Casino, okay, so now he's James Bond. The next one will just be a regular old James Bond movie. Nah, not so much. We're gonna keep that going just a little bit longer. And then by the end of Skyfall, you saw him walk into M's office, and it was like, oh, okay, now it's now the next one's gonna start off and just be a regular James Bond movie. Nope, not so much. And so the whole it feels like this 5-part origin story, and throughout that origin story, we slowly started to meet some of the new players again. We finally got Moneypenny again. We finally got Q again after a little while. We had a new M. And I feel like, boy, are we going to start that whole storyline over again and start to meet these characters all over again. So I frankly, I'm actually very open to what the future might hold. I sort of feel like, a lot of people always ask, do you want to see serious? Do you want to see fun? Do you want to see modern stories? Do you want to see period films? I kind of feel like I don't even really have a preference necessarily, just as long as they do it well. Whatever they decide to do, stick with it. Pick a theme, pick a tone, and just run with it. I kind of feel like. What worries me is they might try to do too much, and it's interesting too. Again, kind of getting back to the finale of No Time to Die, and everybody set as if this is the end of James Bond, and my response to that is honestly my fear is much more on the other end of that spectrum, because I'm almost a little worried. I mean, we just had Amazon purchase. I forget exactly what. I was just the distribution rights, or I don't know exactly what they actually, have the license for. But basically, we're living in a world where people are cranking out content. There is so much content generation. Going back to Star Wars, I remember when the third film came out, one of the bigwigs at Disney said, maybe we're just putting out too much too soon, and maybe we need to slow it down a little bit. And lo and behold, The Mandalorian comes out and it's a huge success. It's very popular. All of a sudden, they put out a timeline of shows, movies, like it was like 15 projects all of a sudden. It was like, wow, well, so much for slowing things down. And I remember, and I kind of thought like, oh, guy, I remember thinking like, again, Hollywood tends to learn wrong lessons. All of a sudden they had one property that was popular, and now we could just go crazy and put out anything we please. So I that's how I'm seeing Hollywood now, and again, all the streaming services. So yeah, do I think that we're looking at the end of James Bond? Nope. I think if anything, they might go a little too crazy in the other direction and feel like we're going to put out the Moneypenny stories and the Felix Leiter stories and the Q stories. And I don't really see that necessarily. Like, am I literally concerned that that's going to be a thing? I don't know. Again, it's like people have asked me, like, how long do you think it's going to be? And I'm like, well, it depends. I mean, if the powers that be keep a creative handle on the property for another film, yeah, it could take a while. It could definitely take a while. On the other hand, if Barbara and Michael decide, I think this is a good one to go out on, and we're going to turn the reins over to someone else, I think it can happen very quickly, where somebody is going to very quickly try to put out a new project. So yeah, my worry is not that we've seen the end of James Bond. I don't care what they do, and I don't care how much they do, as long as they do it well, and as long as they have capable people. I mean, we keep saying I'm not the only person saying that we need a Kevin Feige,
Yeah.
the guy who's been in charge of the Marvel franchise. He was a fan, and I think he understands those properties well enough to be able to do it well and to give them, the love and respect that they deserve. If we get somebody who loves the James Bond franchise the way we do, then okay, then we're in safe hands. But that's a big if. That's a really big if. It's going to hinge on that, basically.
Right. Christopher Nolan it is. In my dreams. But yeah, that's really interesting. You don't want them to just throw out so much content. And it is interesting, the lesson that Disney learned from resting Star Wars and then doing The Mandalorian was we need as many series as possible.
Right, exactly, yeah. And it's funny, I feel like for some reason I keep kind of falling on Star Wars as my examples every time. I was watching something recently and they were talking about world building, as an important part of storytelling. And I remember kind of thinking like, I've always heard that term and it's always been in the back of my mind. And you think of, certain films that do that they put a lot of time and effort into creating the world in which the story happens. But I think it wasn't until recently that I really started to understand how important that actually is. And I mentioned the Star Wars sequels that came out, The Last Jedi, The Rise of Skywalker. And I mean, just abysmal, terrible movies. And I remember, talking about them at length. And it's hard to really sort of verbalize exactly what's wrong with them. And I remember recently, as I was watching the new Boba Fett show, I think it kind of hit me, and it was that world building thing that clicked. I remember when he would walk into one of the bars, the cantinas, and you're looking in the background and you're looking at all the aliens in the background and you're kind of going, oh, that's one of that's the guy from, the other thing. And those are the creatures that were in the other one. And all of a sudden, now I'm taking an interest in what's happening in the background, as opposed to those other Last Jedi when they would walk into these casinos and there's just, a mosh pit of kind of creatures in the background. But I know that whoever just designed those doesn't know anything about Star Wars and they're just making stuff up. They might be having fun with it and they look, good job. But I know as I'm watching these shows that the person who made the show, he understands Star Wars. He understands. So that's why I'm all of a sudden looking in the background, trying to place, this is the one from that. So yeah, I want, I guess, to try to bring that back to James Bond. I mean, again, I want someone who understands the James Bond world, the James Bond stories, and understands why we love them the way we do, and again, it's a whole different world. I mean, it's funny. I love watching Dr. No, because I always feel like, Dr. No is the closest to seeing James Bond in the time that the stories were written. Yeah. And I remember, and every time I watch that movie, I always kind of, smile a little too much at how much time they spend in the airport. It's like they spent when the plane lands in Jamaica, the camera hangs very long on the airplane. All of a sudden the camera is in the control tower, and then they're spending a lot of time in the airport because just the travel part of it was still pretty new and pretty exciting then. So I can appreciate that it is very hard to sort of recapture that magic that Fleming was. So it'll be interesting to see if they can kind of do that. And that's really what I'm hoping for. I really hope that they can just kind of, rebottle that lightning in some ways. And I think Casino Royale is a great example of how it is possible.
Yeah. Yeah. You mentioned Star Wars. I mean, that's one of my great passions. And one of the hallmarks of the George Lucas Star Wars is there's always a moment when the action stops and they just sit round for dinner. They always have a meal in the old films. And, of course, the new Boba Fett series has them all just sitting around a table having a meal and having a chat. And it's like films don't have to be at 100 miles an hour throughout the entire thing. They can sometimes show the world.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Yep.
As I say, that connects to the old Bond films when sometimes you have these fantastic business dinners.
Right. Absolutely, yeah. I mean, honestly, again, one of my favorite Fleming quotes is, I take great pleasure in what I eat and drink. And I just kind of feel like that's the essence of Bond, just enjoying life almost a little too much if there's such a thing.
And I believe your book can teach us a great deal about how to do that. How to enjoy our lives, living like
absolutely,
James Bond.
100%.
I feel that's a great point to leave it. I've been taking up a lot of your time. Thank you very, very much for making time for me, and thank you very much for joining me tonight.
Thank you. And like I said, I apologize it took us this long, but you know what? It was well worth it.
That was on me too. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Anytime.
That was Joe Darlington of Being James Bond. As there's a podcast available on iTunes and Spotify and all the usual good places. Also the author of the book Being James Bond. Do check it out. Link again in the show notes. Thank you very much to Mr. Joe Darlington for joining me.